The sun-scorched prairie stretched before Willow Lawson like the rest of her uncertain future, as she stood on the outskirts of Fort Garland, Colorado, in the summer of 1876. Her weathered carpet bag contained all that remained of her former life in Boston, a life she'd fled with nothing but determination and the haunting whisper of her mother's final words: "Never belong to any man who doesn't see you as his equal." The small frontier town of Fort Garland rose from the dusty landscape like a mirage against the backdrop of distant mountains. Fort Garland had grown from a military outpost to a settlement where ranchers, merchants, and travelers converged in the shadow of the Sangre de Cristo mountain range. Willow's gaze swept across the weathered buildings, the busy trading post, and the saloon where boisterous laughter spilled into the street despite the early hour. Her journey west had depleted her modest savings, but the advertisement seeking a schoolteacher had promised not only employment but a fresh start. At 22, Willow had taught children of Boston's elite, until scandal touched her family name and closed every respectable door. Here, perhaps her past wouldn't matter. "You look lost, miss," a voice drawled behind her. Willow turned to find a young boy, no more than 12, regarding her with curious eyes. "I'm looking for Mayor Thompson's office," she replied, adjusting her bonnet against the glaring sun. "Down the street, past the general store. Can't miss it," the boy said, pointing. "You the new school teacher I hope to be?" She offered a tired smile. "Better you than old Mr. Perkins. He smelled like sour milk and hit our knuckles with a ruler when we couldn't recite our multiplication tables." The boy made a face. "I'm Tommy, by the way. Pleased to meet you, Tommy. I'm Willow Lawson." Tommy nodded sagely. "Well, Miss Lawson, this town could use someone who doesn't smell like sour milk." With that simple endorsement, Willow made her way toward the mayor's office, her steps stirring dust on the hard-packed dirt of what passed for a main street. Men tipped their hats as she passed, and women paused their conversations to assess the newcomer. Willow kept her chin high despite her travel-worn appearance. The mayor's office was a cramped room attached to what appeared to be the town's meeting hall. Mayor Thompson, a portly man with mutton chop whiskers and kind eyes, rose from behind his desk as she entered. "Miss Lawson, I presume? Right on time. Your letter impressed us greatly. Boston-educated teachers don't often seek positions in our humble town." After reviewing her credentials and asking perfunctory questions about her teaching philosophy, Mayor Thompson declared her hired. "School starts in 2 weeks. The previous teacher left rather abruptly, so you'll need to organize everything yourself. Mrs. Peterson at the boarding house has a room ready for you." "Thank you, Mayor Thompson. I won't disappoint you." "I'm sure you won't, my dear. Fort Garland may not be Boston, but we value education. The children need structure and knowledge to thrive in this changing territory." As Willow turned to leave, the mayor added, "One more thing, Miss Lawson. We're a small community. People will be curious about you. They'll ask questions." Willow's heart skipped. "Questions? About your past, why you came west alone?" "A young, educated woman like yourself usually comes as a bride or with family." His expression was gentle but probing. "Is there anything I should know?" She chose her words carefully. "My parents have passed. I came west seeking opportunity and independence." "There's nothing scandalous in that, is there?" Mayor Thompson chuckled. "Not scandalous, perhaps, but unusual. Well, welcome to Fort Garland, Miss Lawson." The Peterson boarding house proved to be a tidy 2-story building with freshly painted shutters. Mrs. Peterson, a widow of ample proportions and even more ample conversation, showed Willow to a small but clean room on the 2nd floor. Bathrooms at the end of the hall. Breakfast at 6 sharp, dinner at 6 in the evening. Lunch is your own affair. No gentlemen callers in the rooms, of course, and we lock the doors at 10. Mrs. Peterson handed her a key. The other boarders are Mr. Tate, the bank clerk, Miss Green, who works at the seamstress shop, and Dr. Mills, though he's often out tending to patients. Willow nodded, committing the information to memory. Rent's due first of the month. You'll find most folks in Fort Garland are decent, hard-working people. Mrs. Peterson paused at the door. Though I'd steer clear of the Rattlesnake Saloon, not a place for a lady, especially after dark. I've no interest in saloons, Mrs. Peterson. Thank you for the advice. Left alone, Willow unpacked her meager belongings and sat on the narrow bed. The weight of her journey settled on her shoulders, and for a moment, she allowed herself to feel the exhaustion, the uncertainty. But only for a moment. She had work to do, a life to build, and the past to leave behind. The following day, Willow rose early to explore her new home. Fort Garland bustled with morning activity, merchants opening shops, ranchers arriving with goods to trade, women gathering at the well to collect water and exchange news. The schoolhouse stood at the edge of town, a simple one-room building with rows of desks and a pot-bellied stove. The air inside hung thick with dust and disuse. Faded primers lined a small bookshelf, and a chalkboard dominated the front wall. This would be her domain, and despite its humble appearance, Willow felt a flutter of anticipation. She spent hours cleaning, arranging desks, and assessing supplies. The summer heat pressed through the windows, and soon her dress clung damply to her skin. She had just stepped outside for fresh air when the thunder of hooves drew her attention. A group of riders approached from the direction of the mountains, their horses lathered from hard riding. At their lead was a man whose presence commanded attention, even from a distance. Tall and broad-shouldered, he sat his horse with the ease of someone born to the saddle. As they neared, his features became clearer, a strong jaw shadowed with stubble, eyes narrowed against the sun, and a weathered hat pulled low on his forehead. The riders slowed as they passed the schoolhouse, and the leader's gaze met Willow's. For a moment, time seemed suspended. Then he touched the brim of his hat in acknowledgement before continuing toward town. "That's Wade Zachariah and his men," said a voice behind her. Willow turned to find a young woman carrying a basket. "I'm sorry," the riders. "That's Wade Zachariah. Owns the Broken Z Ranch north of town. Biggest cattle operation in the county." The woman smiled. "I'm Sarah Miller. My husband runs the general store, Willow Lawson. I'm the new school teacher." "So I heard. The whole town's been talking about nothing else. Will you be teaching my Alice this year?" "She's 6 and already reading better than her 8-year-old brother." They walked together toward town as Sarah shared local gossip. "Wade Zachariah keeps to himself mostly. Came here about 5 years ago, built that ranch from nothing. Some say he was a lawman before. Others think he might have ridden with Quantrill's raiders during the war. Nobody knows for sure, and he doesn't talk about his past." Willow's interest was piqued despite herself. "He seems formidable." "That he is. Fair, though. Pays his men well and stands by his word. Single, too, which makes him the target of every unmarried woman and matchmaking mother for 50 miles. Sarah laughed. "Not that he seems to notice. Too busy building his empire, I suppose." At the general store, Willow purchased paper, pencils, and other supplies for the school. Mr. Miller, a friendly man with spectacles perched on his nose, insisted on giving her a discount. "Consider it an investment in our children's future," he said, waving away her protest. "Besides, teachers never get paid what they're worth." As Willow left the store, she noticed the riders from earlier gathered outside the sheriff's office. Wade Zachariah stood talking with a badge-wearing man, his expression serious. One of his men spotted Willow and nudged another. their gazes following her progress down the street. She quickened her pace, uncomfortable with their attention. Before she could reach the boarding house, a commotion erupted from the Rattlesnake Saloon. A man stumbled through the swinging doors, followed by another who landed a solid punch to his jaw. The first man sprawled in the dirt as onlookers gathered. "You cheating dog!" shouted the attacker, a rough-looking cowhand with liquor on his breath despite the early hour. "I'll teach you to mark cards in my game." The man on the ground spat blood. "Prove it, Jenkins, or shut your mouth." Jenkins lunged forward, but his path was suddenly blocked by a towering figure. Wade Zachariah stepped between the men, his voice low but carrying clearly in the sudden hush. "That's enough. Take your quarrel elsewhere or settle it like civilized men," Jenkins sneered. "Stay out of this, Zachariah. This ain't your business. I'm making it my business." There was no heat in Wade's tone, just calm authority. "Fort Garland doesn't need trouble, and neither of you is worth the bullet it would take to end this." The fallen man scrambled to his feet, glaring at Jenkins but keeping his distance. "He's right," said the sheriff, joining them. "Either shake hands or take it outside town limits where you won't disturb decent folk." Jenkins spat in the dirt. "Fine. But I'm watching you, Carson. No man cheats me twice." As the crowd dispersed, Willow realized she'd been holding her breath. Wade Zachariah's gaze swept the street and landed on her. For the second time that day, their eyes met, and Willow felt a jolt of unexpected recognition, not that they'd met before, but a sense that in another life they might have known each other well. He nodded once, then turned back to the sheriff. Willow hurried to the boarding house, unsettled by her own reaction. That evening at dinner, Willow met her fellow boarders. Dr. Mills proved to be a soft-spoken man with intelligent eyes and prematurely gray hair. Miss Green, the seamstress's assistant, was shy but warm. Mr. Tate, the bank clerk, seemed overly interested in Willow's background. "Boston society must be vastly different from our humble community," he said, passing the potatoes. "Whatever made you leave such civilization for Fort Garland?" "I wanted adventure," Willow replied with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, "and the opportunity to shape young minds without the constraints of Eastern traditions." Dr. Mills saved her from further interrogation. "The children here need a good teacher." The last fellow was more interested in his bottle than his lessons. "Speaking of which," Mrs. Peterson interjected, "there was quite a disturbance at the Rattlesnake today. Sarah Miller told me all about it when she stopped by. Said if Wade Zachariah hadn't stepped in, there might have been real trouble." "Wade Zachariah," Mr. Tate sniffed. "The man acts like he owns this town." "He practically does," Miss Green said softly, "between his ranch and his investments with the railroad coming through." Dr. Mills nodded. "Zachariah's a good man. Pays for medicines for families who can't afford them. Never makes a fuss about it, either." Willow listened, adding these details to the growing picture of the man whose gaze had so unsettled her. "Does he have family?" she asked, trying to sound merely curious. "None that anyone knows of," Mrs. Peterson replied. "Lives in that big house he built with just his ranch hands for company. Shame, really. A man like that should have children to inherit what he's built." The conversation shifted to other topics, but Willow's mind kept returning to Wade Zachariah. There was something compelling about him, a quality that went beyond his obvious physical presence. She reminded herself that she hadn't come to Fort Garland to be distracted by enigmatic ranchers, no matter how intriguing. The next 2 weeks passed in a flurry of preparation. Willow visited families with school-age children, introducing herself and assessing their educational needs. She organized the schoolhouse, created lesson plans, and gradually became acquainted with the rhythms of the town. On several occasions, She spotted Wade Zachariah in town on business, but their paths never directly crossed. Each time, she felt his awareness of her presence, just as she was acutely aware of his. It was a strange, silent acknowledgement that left her both curious and wary. The first day of school arrived with a crisp hint of autumn in the air. 28 children ranging from 6 to 16 filed into the schoolhouse, eyeing their new teacher with varying degrees of interest and suspicion. "Good morning," Willow began, her voice firm but warm. "I'm Miss Lawson, and I'm here to help you learn everything you'll need to make your way in the world." A boy in the back, she would later learn his name, was Ethan Jenkins, son of the troublemaker from the saloon, called out, "What good's book learning to someone who's gonna work cattle all his life?" Instead of chastising him, Willow smiled. "An excellent question. Tell me, can a rancher succeed if he can't calculate how many head of cattle he owns or how much feed they'll need for winter? Can he protect his interests if he can't read a contract? Knowledge is power, young man, no matter what path you choose." Her response seemed to satisfy not only Ethan but several others who had been regarding her skeptically. By lunchtime, Willow had assessed their varied levels of education and begun dividing them into appropriate groups. As the children ate their lunch in the schoolyard, Sarah Miller appeared with a basket. "Thought you might need some sustenance," she said, offering Willow a sandwich and apple. "First days are always the hardest. Thank you." They're a bright group, though there are some definite gaps in their education. That's putting it kindly. Mr. Perkins spent more time napping than teaching toward the end. Sarah lowered her voice. "Just so you know, the Jenkins boy can be trouble, takes after his father. And the Zachariah Ranch hands children Billy and Emma Turner. They're good kids, but might need extra attention. Their mother died last winter, and their father works long hours." Willow glanced at the pair. Sarah indicated a solemn boy of about 10 and a pigtailed girl perhaps 2 years younger. They sat slightly apart from the others, sharing a simple lunch. "Thank you for telling me. I'll keep an eye on them." After school dismissed, Willow was erasing the chalkboard when she heard a horse approach. Thinking it might be a parent, she stepped outside to find Wade Zachariah dismounting from a magnificent bay stallion. "Miss Lawson," he said, removing his hat. His voice was deep, with a slight drawl that suggested Southern origins. Up close, she could see his eyes were an unusual shade of green, striking against his sun-darkened skin. "Mr. Zachariah, how may I help you? I understand Billy and Emma Turner are in your class." "Their father works for me, and I promised their mother before she passed that I'd look after their education." He glanced at the schoolhouse. "How are they doing?" Willow was surprised by his direct interest. "It's only been one day, but they seem bright and attentive." "Billy is particularly good with numbers, and Emma has a wonderful vocabulary for her age." Wade nodded, satisfaction evident in his expression. "Their mother taught them what she could. She was educated, unlike many out here." "May I ask why you're personally checking on them?" "It's admirable but unusual." Something flickered in his eyes, a memory perhaps, or a secret. "I keep my promises, Miss Lawson, and children need advocates." He settled his hat back on his head. "I won't take more of your time. Good day." As he turned to leave, Willow found herself reluctant to end the conversation. "Mr. Zachariah," she called. When he looked back, she continued, "If there's anything specific you think they should learn, beyond the standard curriculum, I'd be interested in your thoughts." A small smile curved his lips, transforming his stern features. "Teach them to question everything and accept nothing at face value. That's a lesson that serves well in life." With that cryptic statement, he mounted his horse and rode away. Willow watched him go, more intrigued than ever. Wade Zachariah was not at all what she had expected from the town's wealthiest rancher. There was depth to him, and a complexity that belied his frontier appearance. As September faded into October, Willow settled into her role as Fort Garland's teacher. The children warmed to her methods, which combined firm discipline with genuine enthusiasm for learning. Even Ethan Jenkins grudgingly participated, though he remained somewhat sullen. Billy and Emma Turner became particular favorites, not because Wade Zachariah had taken an interest in them, but because of their eager minds and quiet determination. Occasionally after school, Wade himself would arrive to collect them if their father was occupied with ranch business. During these brief encounters, Willow and Wade exchanged observations about the children's progress and sometimes touched on broader topics, books they had read, developments in the territory, the changing seasons. Each conversation, though brief, added to Willow's understanding of him. He was educated, far more than most men in the area, and possessed a wry humor that emerged when he was relaxed. One afternoon in late October, Willow was walking back to town after gathering autumn leaves with her students for a science lesson when dark clouds rolled in with alarming speed. The first fat raindrops struck just as she reached the edge of town, and within moments the heavens opened in a deluge. She quickened her pace, but the rain was so heavy that she could barely see. Suddenly, a large figure on horseback appeared beside her. "Miss Lawson, you'll drown before you reach the boarding house," Wade Zachariah called over the storm. He extended his hand. "Allow me." Without waiting for her response, he leaned down and lifted her effortlessly onto his horse, settling her sideways in front of him. One strong arm circled her waist as he guided the horse through the muddy street. Willow was acutely aware of his warmth, the solid wall of his chest at her back, and the scent of leather and clean mail that surrounded her. It was improper, this closeness, yet she couldn't find it in herself to object when the alternative was a thorough drenching. They reached the boarding house quickly, and Wade dismounted first, then lifted her down. Their eyes met as her feet touched the ground, his hands lingering at her waist for a moment longer than necessary. "Thank you, Mr. Zachariah," she said, breathless from more than just the dash through the rain. "Wade," he corrected, rain streaming down his face. "After sharing a horse in a downpour, I think we can dispense with formalities, Miss Lawson." "Willow, then," she offered, surprising herself. He smiled, a genuine smile that transformed his face and made her heart skip a beat. "Willow, it suits you, strong but graceful." Before she could respond, Mrs. Peterson opened the door. "Goodness, Miss Lawson, you're soaked. Come in before you catch your death." She nodded to Wade. "Mr. Zachariah, you're welcome to wait out the worst of it." "Thank you, madam, but my men are expecting me." He touched his hat, gave Willow one last look, and mounted his horse. Willow watched through the window as he rode away, disappearing into the curtain of rain. Something had shifted between them, something subtle but significant. And for the first time since arriving in Fort Garland, she felt a flutter of anticipation that had nothing to do with her teaching position. As autumn deepened, Wade's visits to check on the Turner children became more frequent, though Willow suspected they were no longer solely motivated by concern for their education. Each time, he found reasons to linger, to engage her in conversation that stretched beyond polite exchanges. She learned that he had fought for the Confederacy during the war, though he spoke of it reluctantly and without pride. That he had drifted west afterward, unable to return to a home that no longer existed. That he had worked as a cowhand, a trail boss, and briefly as a town marshal before settling in Colorado Territory and building his ranch. In turn, she shared carefully edited stories of her own past her childhood in Boston, her love of books, her desire to make a difference through education. She never mentioned the scandal that had driven her west, the whispers that had followed her family's downfall, or the desperate need to forge an identity separate from her parents' disgrace. One crisp November afternoon, as Wade was helping Billy and Emma into his wagon after school, he turned to Willow. "The first snow will come soon. Have you ever experienced a mountain winter, Miss Lawson?" "No, though I've heard they can be quite severe. More than you might imagine." His expression grew serious. "This isn't Boston, where help is always nearby. When blizzards hit, people can be stranded for days, even weeks. I'm sure I'll manage. Mrs. Peterson has been very helpful with preparations." Wade hesitated, then said, "I'm hosting a harvest gathering at the ranch this Saturday. Nothing fancy, just food and conversation before winter sets in. The whole town is invited." He cleared his throat. "I'd be honored if you'd attend." Willow felt a rush of pleasure at the invitation, though she tried to maintain her composure. "Thank you, I'd like that. I'll send a wagon for you. The ranch is a fair distance." As she watched him drive away with the children, Willow acknowledged the growing attraction between them. Wade Zachariah was unlike any man she'd known in Boston direct, unpolished in some ways, yet possessing an inherent dignity that commanded respect. His interest in her was flattering, but also concerning. She had secrets, reasons why entanglements were dangerous. Reasons why she had whispered to herself on countless lonely nights, "I'm nobody's woman." Yet the thought of spending more time in his company was undeniably appealing. Saturday dawned clear and cold. The wagon Wade sent was driven by a ranch hand named Hank, a weathered man with a friendly disposition who kept up a running commentary about the landscape during their journey. "That there's Sangre de Cristo Pass," he pointed to a gap in the mountains. "Gets completely blocked with snow come January. Boss always stocks extra supplies, knowing we might be cut off from town." The Broken Z Ranch sprawled across a valley backed by pine-covered hills. The main house was larger than Willow had expected, a two-story structure built of sturdy logs with a wide porch and glass windows. Surrounding outbuildings, corrals, and bunkhouses created a small settlement. Wade himself came to help her from the wagon, his usual dusty work clothes replaced by clean trousers and a crisp shirt. His hair, normally hidden under his hat, was dark and slightly wavy. "Welcome to the Broken Z," he said, offering his arm. "I'm glad you came." The house interior was surprisingly refined, polished wood floors, comfortable furniture, and bookshelves lining one wall of the main room. A massive stone fireplace dominated the space, with a fire crackling welcomingly. "Your home is beautiful," Willow said, genuinely impressed. "You've created something remarkable here. It's taken time." Wade's gaze swept the room with quiet pride. "And it's still not finished. A house needs more than walls and furniture to be a home." The implication hung in the air between them, but before Willow could respond, other guests began arriving. Soon the ranch was filled with townsfolk enjoying the abundant food and drink. Wade proved an attentive host, making sure everyone felt welcome while finding moments to return to Willow's side. As evening approached, someone produced a fiddle, and furniture was pushed aside for dancing. Wade extended his hand to Willow. "Would you do me the honor?" She hesitated only briefly before placing her hand in his. "I should warn you, I'm more accustomed to formal ballroom dances than don't worry," he said, leading her to the center of the room. "Just follow my lead." The fiddle launched into a lively tune, and Wade guided her through steps that were unfamiliar but not difficult. His hand at her waist was firm, his movements confident. Willow found herself laughing as they twirled among other couples. the worries that constantly shadowed her temporarily forgotten. When the music slowed to a waltz, Wade drew her closer, still maintaining a respectful distance but creating an intimate space that seemed to exclude everyone else in the room. "You're a natural," he murmured. "I have an excellent partner," she replied, meeting his gaze. Something in his expression shifted, a softening around his eyes. "Willow," whatever he intended to say was interrupted as the front door burst open, admitting a gust of cold air and a ranch hand whose face was etched with urgency. "Boss, rustlers hit the north pasture. They've taken at least 30 head, maybe more." Wade's expression hardened instantly. "When? Not more than an hour ago, Jenkins spotted them moving fast toward the pass." Jenkins Willow remembered the troublemaker from the saloon. Wade had men watching him. Gather 10 men, armed. Wade turned to Willow, regret evident in his eyes. "I'm sorry, cattle theft is, I understand," she assured him. "Go." He strode to a cabinet and removed a rifle. "Hank will see everyone safely back to town." Within minutes, the festive atmosphere dissolved as guests hurriedly prepared to leave. Willow watched from the porch as Wade and his men rode out, their silhouettes disappearing into the gathering dusk. She couldn't shake the foreboding that settled over her as Hank helped her into the wagon for the return journey. "Don't you worry about the boss, Miss Lawson," he said, noticing her expression. "He's handled worse than cattle rustlers." "It's dangerous work, though, isn't it? Especially at night." Hank nodded soberly. "That it is, but the boss is careful. He won't risk his men needlessly." The ride back to town was subdued, the earlier merriment replaced by concerned murmurs about the rustlers and speculation about who might be behind the theft. "Has to be Jenkins," someone said. "Man's been nursing a grudge since Wade testified against his brother in that horse stealing case last year. Nah, Jenkins hasn't got the brains to organize something like this. My money's on those drifters who have been camped north of town." Willow listened, piecing together more of Wade's history in this community from the snippets of conversation. By the time they reached Fort Garland, her admiration for him had only grown, tempered though it was by concern for his safety. The next day, Sunday, brought no news from the ranch. Willow attended church service, where prayers were offered for the safety of Wade and his men. She spent the afternoon trying to focus on lesson plans for the coming week, but her thoughts continually drifted to the image of Wade riding into the darkness. Monday morning dawned with a light dusting of snow, the first of the season. As Willow walked to the schoolhouse, she spotted a rider approaching from the north, one of Wade's men, she recognized. He rode directly to the sheriff's office. Throughout the school day, Willow maintained her composure, but each time the door opened, she looked up expectantly. When dismissal time finally arrived, she found herself lingering, straightening desks and organizing books long after the children had gone. A shadow fell across the doorway. Wade stood there, hat in hand, a bruise darkening one cheekbone and fatigue evident in the set of his shoulders. "You're back," she said simply, relief washing through her. "Just got in. Wanted to let you know we're all safe." He stepped inside, closing the door against the cold. "We recovered most of the cattle, though we lost 2 men in the process." "I'm so sorry." She moved toward him, stopping just short of reaching out. "Are you hurt?" "Nothing serious. This is from a tree branch, not a bullet." He touched the bruise ruefully. "The rustlers weren't what we expected." "What do you mean?" "They weren't local. Professional thieves working their way south, hitting isolated ranches. We tracked them to their camp, but they were waiting for us." His eyes darkened with the memory. "It got ugly." Willow saw the weight of leadership in his expression, the responsibility he felt for the men who had followed him into danger. Without thinking, she laid her hand on his arm. "You did what you had to do to protect what's yours." Wade covered her hand with his own larger one. "Thank you for understanding that." His gaze held hers, searching. Not everyone would. They stood like that for a long moment, connected by touch and mutual understanding. Then Wade stepped back as if remembering himself. "I should let you get home. It's getting late. Walk with me," Willow suggested, gathering her things. "Unless you need to return to the ranch. My men can handle things for now." They walked slowly through town, their breath forming clouds in the crisp air. Wade recounted more details of the confrontation with the rustlers, including how they had turned the thieves over to a U.S. Marshal who happened to be passing through the area. "The laws spread thin out here," he explained. "Sometimes justice falls to those willing to enforce it themselves." "That sounds dangerous," Willow observed, "both for the enforcer and for those being judged." "It can be. That's why I try to work with proper authorities whenever possible." He glanced at her. "I've seen what happens when men take justice into their own hands without restraint. It's not something I care to repeat." They had reached the boarding house. Willow turned to face him, studying his weary features in the fading light. "Will you be all right?" "I always am." His smile didn't reach his eyes, "though I regret how our evening was interrupted. Perhaps we can try again someday. I'd like that." He hesitated, then added, "Willow, I know you haven't been in Fort Garland long, but I've come to value our conversations, your perspective." She felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the wool shawl wrapped around her shoulders. "As do I, Wade." He took her hand, his touch gentle despite his calloused palm. "Good night, then. I'll see you soon." Willow watched him walk away, aware that something fundamental had shifted in their relationship. There was an understanding between them now, unspoken but real. And for the first time since arriving in Fort Garland, she allowed herself to imagine a future that included more than just her teaching position. The weeks leading up to Christmas passed in a blur of activity. Willow's students prepared for their holiday recital, practicing poems and songs with varying degrees of enthusiasm. The town decorated for the season, and a spirit of festivity prevailed despite the increasing cold and occasional snowfall. Wade made a point of coming to town more frequently, sometimes on the pretext of business, but always finding time to visit the schoolhouse. Their conversations deepened, ranging from literature to philosophy to their hopes for the territory's future. The Christmas recital drew the entire community to the town hall. Children performed their pieces to applause and proud parental tears, and afterward, tables groaned with food brought by every family. Wade appeared at Willow's side as she supervised the younger children's games. "You've done wonders with them," he said, watching as even the most reluctant students participated enthusiastically. "They respect you. They just needed someone to believe in their potential," Willow replied. "Children rise to expectations, high or low. A valuable lesson for everyone, not just teachers." Wade's gaze was warm as it rested on her face. "I have something for you, a Christmas gift." "Wade, you shouldn't have. I wanted to." He pressed a small package into her hand. "Open it later when you're alone." Before she could respond, Mayor Thompson called for everyone's attention to announce a special Christmas dance to be held the following evening. Later, in the privacy of her room, Willow carefully unwrapped Wade's gift. Inside the plain paper was a small box containing a silver brooch in the shape of a book. When she opened it, she found it was actually a locket with space for 2 tiny portraits. A note in Wade's bold handwriting accompanied it. "For memories yet to be made. Merry Christmas, Willow." The simplicity and thoughtfulness of the gift touched her deeply. She fastened the brooch to her dress for the dance the next evening, a visible token of her growing feelings for the rancher. The Christmas dance transformed the town hall. Evergreen boughs and red ribbons decorated the walls, and lanterns cast a warm glow over the festivities. Willow wore her best dress, a deep blue wool that complemented her fair coloring with Wade's brooch prominently displayed. She had just entered when Wade appeared at her side, handsome in a dark suit that emphasized his broad shoulders. "You look beautiful," he said, his gaze appreciative. "Thank you, and thank you for the brooch. It's perfect. It suits you." His fingers lightly touched the silver book at her collar. "May I have the first dance?" As they moved together to the music, Willow was conscious of eyes watching them, of whispers behind hands. Their growing closeness had not gone unnoticed in the small community. "People are talking," she murmured. "Let them." Wade's hand tightened slightly at her waist. "I've never cared much for gossip. Nor have I, but does it bother you being seen with me?" "No, of course not." She met his gaze directly. "I just don't want to be the subject of speculation." In a town this size, breathing is cause for speculation. His smile was wry. "Unless there's another reason you're concerned," Willow hesitated. This was the moment to mention her past, to explain why involvement with her might not be wise. But the words wouldn't come. Not here, not now, with music playing and his arms around her. "No," she said finally. "No other reason." The evening continued pleasantly, with Willow dancing not only with Wade but with other men from town, including Dr. Mills and even Mayor Thompson. But it was to Wade she returned between dances, and with him she shared the midnight supper. As the celebration wound down, Wade escorted her back to the boarding house. Snow had begun to fall, large flakes drifting lazily in the still air. They walked slowly, reluctant for the evening to end. At the boarding house steps, Wade took both her hands in his. "Willow, these past months have been. I've never met anyone quite like you." "Nor I you," she admitted softly. "I'm not a man of fancy words, but I'd like to call on you properly if you'll allow it." Willow's heart raced. This was the moment of decision, to move forward or to retreat behind the walls she'd built around herself. "I'd like that, Wade." His smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. Slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, he leaned down and brushed his lips against hers. The kiss was gentle, questioning, and over almost before it began. "Merry Christmas, Willow," he whispered. "Merry Christmas, Wade." As she watched him walk away through the falling snow, Willow touched her lips, still feeling the warmth of his kiss. She had come to Fort Garland seeking a fresh start, never expecting to find someone who made her question her determination to remain independent, unattached. Yet here she was, contemplating a future that included Wade Zachariah. The thought was both thrilling and terrifying. January brought the harsh reality of mountain winter. Snow piled in drifts against buildings, and for days at a time, the temperature never rose above freezing. School continued when possible, but there were days when Willow dismissed early due to approaching storms. Wade visited town less frequently, the journey from his ranch made treacherous by snow and ice. But when he did come, he made a point of spending time with Willow, taking her for sleigh rides or simply sharing coffee at the hotel restaurant, which offered more privacy than the boarding house. During one such visit in late January, they sat by the hotel's fire as a blizzard raged outside. "The pass is nearly blocked," Wade told her, concern evident in his expression. "If this keeps up, Fort Garland will be isolated until the spring thaw." "Is that why you came to town? To warn people?" "Partly." He reached across the table to take her hand, "and partly because I needed to see you." The simple admission warmed her more than the fire. "I've missed you too." Wade's thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. "Willow, there's something I need to tell you, something about my past." She tensed involuntarily. "What is it?" "Before I came to Colorado, I was married. Of all the revelations she had feared, this wasn't one she'd considered. Married, her name was Caroline. We were childhood sweethearts in Virginia, married young before the war. His expression grew distant. When I returned from fighting, everything was gone: our home, our land, our future. Caroline had died of fever while I was away. I'm so sorry, Wade. Willow squeezed his hand, heart aching for his loss. For years afterward, I didn't care if I lived or died. I drifted, took risks no sane man would take. Then I came here and something shifted. I started building again, not just a ranch but a life. His gaze focused on her face. And then you arrived, and suddenly the future held possibilities I thought were lost to me forever. Willow felt tears prick her eyes at the raw honesty in his voice. Wade, you don't need to say anything. I just wanted you to know why I might seem cautious sometimes, why this matters so much to me. He released her hand and sat back. I've learned that happiness can be snatched away in an instant. It makes a man wary of hoping too much. I understand more than you might think. This was her opportunity to share her own past, but the words stuck in her throat. How could she tell this honorable man that her father had embezzled from his clients, ruining countless families before taking his own life? That her mother had died of grief and shame? That the Lawson name was synonymous with disgrace in Boston society? Instead, she said, "Thank you for trusting me with this." Wade studied her face, as if sensing her withheld secrets. "Someday, when you're ready, I hope you'll trust me with whatever it is that brought you to Fort Garland alone." Before she could respond, the hotel owner approached their table. "Mr. Zachariah, sheriff needs to see you. Says it's urgent." Wade excused himself, promising to return shortly. Willow sat alone, troubled by her own cowardice. Wade had shared his deepest pain, yet she couldn't bring herself to reveal hers. When he returned, his expression was grim. "The blizzard's worse than expected. Sheriff's ordering everyone to stay put until it passes. No one in or out of town. How long will that be? Hard to say. Could be days." He glanced out the window at the whirling snow. "I need to help secure the town." "Will you be all right at the boarding house?" "Of course. Don't worry about me." Despite her assurance, Wade insisted on escorting her back to Mrs. Peterson's, fighting through snow that had already accumulated to knee-height in some places. At the door, he cupped her face in his gloved hands. "Stay safe, Willow. I'll check on you when I can." The blizzard raged for 3 days. Willow helped Mrs. Peterson prepare food for stranded travelers who couldn't reach the hotel, and the boarding house became a haven for several families caught in town by the storm. On the morning of the 4th day, the sky cleared to reveal a transformed landscape. Fort Garland lay buried under feet of snow, with paths carved between buildings like tunnels. Men worked to clear the most essential routes, and slowly, the town began to function again. School remained closed, as many families lived too far away to safely make the journey. Willow volunteered at the church, which had become a temporary shelter for those whose homes had insufficient heating or supplies. It was there, distributing soup to a group of elderly residents, that she heard the news. Wade Zachariah had left town before dawn with supplies for isolated homesteads to the north. "Man's a fool," muttered one old-timer. "Noble, but a fool. That country's treacherous after a storm like this." "He took 4 of his best men and 10 pack horses," someone else added. "Sheriff tried to talk him out of it, but Zachariah said there were children out there who needed help." Willow's stomach clenched with fear. She knew Wade well enough now to understand he would never leave others in danger if he could help, but the thought of him in the snow-choked wilderness filled her with dread. 2 days passed with no word. Then 3. The town held its collective breath, waiting for news. Willow threw herself into volunteer work, trying to keep her mind occupied, but each hour that passed without Wade's return increased her anxiety. On the fourth day, as twilight approached, a shout went up from the town's edge. Riders were approaching, moving slowly through the deep snow. Willow joined others rushing to meet them. The sight that greeted her made her heart leap to her throat. Wade led the group, his face gaunt with exhaustion, his clothes caked with ice. Behind him, his men looked equally spent, but they had returned with more people than they'd left, with a family with 3 small children, an elderly couple, and a young woman clutching an infant. Wade dismounted stiffly, his movements suggesting injury beneath his heavy coat. When he saw Willow among the crowd, his expression softened momentarily before he turned to help the rescued family from their horse. The town mobilized quickly to care for the newcomers. Dr. Mills directed them to the church for immediate attention, while others took charge of the exhausted horses. Willow made her way to Wade's side as he handed the last child to waiting arms. "You're hurt," she said, noticing how he favored his right side. "It's nothing. Took a fall in a ravine." His voice was hoarse with fatigue. "Those people needed help, and now you do." She took his arm, supporting him as his strength seemed to ebb. "Dr. Mills needs to look at you." For once, Wade didn't argue. He allowed her to guide him to the doctor's makeshift examination area in a side room of the church. There he sank onto a chair, grimacing as he removed his coat to reveal a blood-stained shirt. "What happened?" Willow asked, helping him with the buttons when his fingers proved too numb to manage. "Ice gave way under my horse. We both went down hard, landed on some rocks." He inhaled sharply as the shirt pulled away from a deep gash along his ribs. The McAllisters were trapped in their cabin. Roof had collapsed from the snow weight, if we hadn't arrived when we did. Dr. Mills entered, took one look at the wound, and sent Willow for hot water and bandages. By the time she returned, Wade was stretched out on a cot, his expression tight with pain as the doctor cleaned the injury. "3 broken ribs, and this gash needs stitching," Dr. Mills informed her. "He's also suffering from exposure and exhaustion. He needs real rest, not just a few hours before he's off again playing hero." Wade's eyes found Willow's. "I had to go, Willow. You understand that, don't you?" "I do." She knelt beside the cot, taking his cold hand in hers. "But Dr. Mills is right. You need to recover." "Stay," he murmured, his eyelids growing heavy as the doctor administered laudanum for the pain. "Please." "I'm not going anywhere," she promised. The next few days saw Willow dividing her time between her reopened school and caring for Wade, who had been moved to a room at the hotel for recovery. His men returned to the ranch to manage operations, while the townsfolk rallied to ensure he had everything he needed. On the 3rd evening of his convalescence, Willow brought him dinner and found him sitting up in bed, color returning to his face. "You look better," she observed, setting the tray beside him. "Feel better. Dr. Mills says I can leave tomorrow if I promise not to ride for another week." He made a face that reminded her of her more restless students. "I'm not good at sitting still, so I've noticed." She settled in the chair beside his bed. "Your men sent word that the ranch is fine. The cattle weathered the storm better than expected." "Good. That's good." Wade pushed his food around the plate without much enthusiasm. "Willow, I've been thinking while lying here." "A dangerous pastime," she teased gently. "Maybe so." His smile faded into seriousness. "When I was out there in that blizzard, not sure if we'd make it back, I realized something. Life's too short for hesitation, too unpredictable for careful planning." Willow's heart began to race. "What are you saying, Wade?" "I'm saying that I love you." The words hung in the air between them, simple but profound. "I think I started falling in love with you that first day at the schoolhouse, and every day since has only confirmed what I felt then." Emotion welled in Willow's throat, making speech impossible for a moment. When she finally found her voice, it emerged as a whisper. "I love you too." Wade reached for her hand, his grip firm despite his weakened state. "Then marry me, Willow. Be my wife, my partner. Help me build something that will outlast us both." The proposal, so direct and heartfelt, stole her breath. This was everything she had begun to hope for, yet feared to expect. But the shadow of her past still loomed. "Wade, there are things you don't know about me. I know everything that matters. I know your heart, your mind. I know you're the woman I want to spend my life with." His green eyes held her steadily. "Whatever you're afraid to tell me, it can't change that." Willow took a deep breath. It was time for honesty, whatever the cost. "My father was Harrison Lawson of Lawson Investment Banking in Boston." Recognition flickered in Wade's expression. "The scandal. I read about it in Eastern newspapers." "Then you know he stole from his clients, hundreds of them for years." The shame was still raw, despite the distance she'd put between herself and the events. "When it was discovered, he took his own life rather than face justice. My mother couldn't bear the disgrace. She died 6 months later." "I'm sorry, Willow, truly. I changed my name not legally, but I began using my mother's maiden name. I came west not just for a fresh start, but to escape the hatred, the accusations." She looked down at their joined hands. "People who lost everything blamed our entire family. There were threats." "None of that was your doing," Wade said firmly. "No, but I benefited from his crimes. The clothes I wore, the education I received, all paid for with stolen money." Tears threatened, but she blinked them back. "When I realized the truth, I gave away everything I could, but it wasn't enough." "It could never be enough." Wade's free hand tilted her chin up, forcing her to meet his gaze. "Listen to me, Willow. We are not defined by our parents' actions. We make our own choices, forge our own paths. You've chosen a life of service, of teaching. That speaks to who you truly are. But if people here knew, let them know. I'll stand beside you." His expression was resolute. "I've faced prejudice and hatred too, for the uniform I once wore. The South lost the war, but the bitterness lingers. I understand what it means to carry a legacy you didn't choose." Willow saw the truth of his words in his eyes, the absolute certainty of his love. "Are you sure, Wade? Being associated with me could harm your standing in the community." "I've never been more sure of anything." He squeezed her hand. "So, Willow Lawson, I'll ask again. Will you marry me?" The last of her resistance crumbled. "Yes," she whispered, then more firmly. "Yes, I will marry you, Wade Zachariah." He pulled her close, their lips meeting in a kiss that sealed their promise to each other. When they parted, both were smiling through tears. "I should warn you," Wade said, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Life on a ranch isn't easy, especially for someone raised in the city. I'm stronger than I look, Mr. Zachariah, and I'm a quick learner." "I've no doubt of that, Miss Lawson." His smile faded into solemnity. "There's one more thing. If we're sharing truths, you should know everything. During the war, I did things I'm not proud of, necessary things in battle, but they haunt me still. We all have regrets, Wade. What matters is who we choose to be now, today." He nodded slowly. "Wise words. And with you by my side, I believe the future will outshine the past." News of their engagement spread through Fort Garland like wildfire. Most reactions were positive. Wade was respected, and Willow had earned the community's affection through her dedication to their children. A few raised eyebrows at the relatively brief courtship, but in frontier communities, practicality often outweighed convention. Mayor Thompson was one of the first to offer congratulations, followed by Mrs. Peterson, who dabbed at her eyes while lamenting the loss of her favorite boarder. The children were excited, especially Billy and Emma Turner, who had grown attached to both their teacher and Wade. The wedding was set for early April, when spring would be transforming the landscape and travel would be easier for those coming from distant ranches. Willow would finish the school term and then move to the Broken Z Ranch as Wade's wife. In the weeks leading up to the wedding, Willow divided her time between teaching and preparations. Wade had suggested hiring help for the ranch house, which needed a woman's touch after years of bachelor occupation. "I want it to feel like your home too," he told her as they walked through the spacious rooms during her first visit back to the ranch after his recovery. "Change whatever you like. Add whatever you need." Willow was touched by his generosity and consideration. They spent hours discussing plans for their shared future, expanding the house eventually, perhaps adding a small library, definitely creating a garden where Willow could grow flowers and vegetables. The subject of children arose naturally in these conversations. Wade made no secret of his desire for a family, and Willow found herself imagining their children running through the meadows surrounding the ranch, learning to ride almost before they could walk. One evening in late March, as they sat on the porch of the ranch house watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and crimson, Wade turned to her with an expression of quiet contentment. "Are you happy, Willow? Truly happy with this choice? More than I ever thought possible." She leaned against his shoulder, savoring his warmth in the cool evening air. "When I came west, I was running from the past. I never expected to find a future that felt so right. I felt the same after Caroline died, like the best part of my life was over." His arm tightened around her. "But now I know it was just beginning." Willow tilted her face up to his. "I love you, Wade Zachariah, and I love you, Willow Lawson." He kissed her gently, then whispered against her lips, "Soon to be Willow Zachariah." Their wedding day dawned clear and mild, with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of new growth and possibility. The ceremony was held in the town church, filled to capacity with well-wishers. Willow wore a simple gown of ivory silk ordered from Denver, with Wade's brooch pinned at her throat. Wade looked handsome and slightly uncomfortable in a new suit, his usual weathered hat replaced for the occasion. As they exchanged vows, Willow's voice trembled slightly with emotion. "I, Willow, take thee, Wade, to be my wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part." Wade's response was steady, his eyes never leaving hers as he repeated the sacred promises. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, the church erupted in applause and cheers. The celebration afterward was typical frontier-style: abundant food, music, dancing, and enough whiskey to ensure high spirits throughout. As twilight approached, Wade led Willow to a waiting carriage decorated with ribbons and wildflowers. "Time to go home, Mrs. Zachariah," he said, helping her up. The pride in his voice when he used her new name made her heart swell. Their arrival at the ranch was met with another surprise. The house had been transformed in their absence. Fresh flowers filled vases in every room, candles glowed on tables, and a path of rose petals led to the master bedroom. "Your ranch hands did all this?" Willow asked. Amazed, Wade chuckled. "With some direction from Sarah Miller and other ladies in town, my men wouldn't know a rose petal from a cow chip." In the privacy of their bedroom, all nervousness fell away. Their love found physical expression in tender touches and passionate embraces, their bodies joining as their hearts and lives had. Afterward, as they lay wrapped in each other's arms, Wade traced the curve of her cheek with gentle fingers. "Happy, Mrs. Zachariah, completely." She nestled closer, head resting on his chest where she could hear the strong, steady beat of his heart. "I never thought I'd belong to anyone. After everything that happened, I told myself I would always be independent, answerable only to myself. And now I understand that loving someone doesn't mean losing yourself. It means finding a better version of yourself." She smiled in the darkness. "Remember that day when we argued about whether the older children should study Latin? I remember. You told me quite firmly that a classical education had value even on the frontier, and you said I was being impractical." She laughed softly at the memory. "But later, you brought me that Latin primer you'd ordered from Denver, because you convinced me you were right." His hand stroked her hair. "That's what I want, Willow. A marriage where we challenge each other, make each other better." "That's what we'll have," she promised, sealing her words with a kiss. Spring melted into summer, and summer blazed into fall. Willow adapted to ranch life with a determination that impressed even the most skeptical cowboys. She learned to ride better, to help with simple ranch tasks, and to manage the large household. But she also maintained her connection to teaching, tutoring the ranch hands' children, and occasionally substituting at the Fort Garland school when needed. Wade's pride in his wife was evident to everyone. He consulted her on business decisions, valued her insight on managing the men, and never tired of watching her bring grace and warmth to what had once been merely a house. On a crisp October evening, almost exactly a year since their first meeting, they sat on the porch after dinner, wrapped in blankets against the growing chill. "I have news," Willow said, a smile playing at her lips. "Good news, I hope." Wade turned to study her face in the fading light. "The best." She took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. "We're going to have a baby." Wade's expression transformed from confusion to wonder to joy in the span of a heartbeat. "A baby? You're sure?" "Dr. Mills confirmed it yesterday when I was in town. We'll become parents in the spring." With a whoop of delight, Wade lifted her from her chair and spun her in a circle, mindful of her condition despite his excitement. "A baby, our baby," Willow laughed, sharing his joy. "I take it you're pleased, Willow. There aren't words." He set her gently back on her feet, his hands cradling her face. "Thank you for this gift, for your love, for being my wife." That winter proved milder than the previous one, allowing Wade to stay closer to home as Willow's pregnancy progressed. He hovered sometimes, concerned about her health, until she teased that she was carrying a child not made of porcelain. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time," she reminded him, "and I'm strong and healthy. I know, it's just." His hand rested on her growing belly. "You and this child are everything to me." As spring approached, they prepared the nursery together, converting a room adjacent to their bedroom. Wade surprised Willow by crafting a cradle himself, working on it in the evenings by the fire. "My father made one for me," he explained as he sanded the smooth pine. "And his father before him. It's a tradition I want to continue." Their son, William Harrison Zachariah, was born on a perfect April day when wildflowers carpeted the meadows and new calves wobbled alongside their mothers in the pastures. The labor was long but uncomplicated, with Dr. Mills attending and Wade refusing to leave Willow's side despite tradition dictating men wait elsewhere. When Wade held his son for the first time, tears streamed unashamedly down his face. "He's perfect," he whispered, counting tiny fingers and toes. "Absolutely perfect." Willow, exhausted but radiant, watched her husband cradle their child with such tenderness that her heart felt close to bursting. "He has your eyes, and your determination. Did you see how he fought against the swaddling?" Wade brought the baby back to her, settling him in her arms. "William after both of us, and Harrison after my father," Willow confirmed. "Despite everything, he was a good father to me. I want to remember that part of him." Wade nodded, understanding. "William Harrison Zachariah." a strong name for a boy who will grow up knowing he is loved beyond measure. Young William soon nicknamed Will thrived in the ranch environment. By his first birthday, he was toddling determinedly after his father, showing an early affinity for horses and the outdoors that delighted Wade. Life settled into a pattern of seasons marked by ranch work, community gatherings, and the joy of watching their son grow. Willow sometimes taught at the Fort Garland school when a substitute was needed, bringing Will with her to the delight of her students. When Will was 2, Willow discovered she was expecting again. This pregnancy proved more difficult than the first, with Willow confined to bed for the final months. Wade was her constant support, hiring a housekeeper to manage daily tasks and spending every possible moment at her side. Their daughter, Elizabeth Caroline Zachariah, arrived in the midst of a summer thunderstorm, small but with a lusty cry that belied her size. Willow recovered slowly from the difficult birth, but the sight of Wade holding their daughter with the same wonder he'd shown their son made every discomfort worthwhile. "She looks like you," he said, comparing the baby's delicate features to her mother's. "She'll be beautiful." "And strong," Willow added. "Like her father." As their family grew, so did the ranch. Wade's careful management and forward-thinking investments in the expanding railroad industry increased their prosperity. They built the library Willow had dreamed of, filled with books for both education and pleasure. The garden she'd planned became a sanctuary of color and fragrance amid the rugged landscape. When Will was 6 and Elizabeth 4, Willow established a small school on the ranch property for their children and those of the ranch hands. What began as informal lessons evolved into a proper classroom setting, with Willow resuming her role as teacher with as much dedication as she'd shown in Fort Garland. One evening after the children were asleep, Wade found Willow in the library, surrounded by books and papers as she planned the next day's lessons. "You never really left teaching, did you?" he observed, settling beside her on the sofa. "I couldn't. It's part of who I am." She leaned against him, grateful for his understanding. "Thank you for supporting this. Why wouldn't I? Education matters, especially out here where opportunities are limited." He gestured to the shelves of books. "Knowledge opens doors just as it did for you." Willow thought of her journey from Boston to this moment, the fears she'd overcome, the love she'd found, the family they'd created together. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked suddenly. "Marrying me? Taking on my past?" Wade's surprise was evident. "Never, not for a single moment." He turned to face her fully. "What brought this on?" "I had a letter from Boston today. An old friend wrote that some people still speak of the Lawson disgrace even after all these years." She sighed. "I worry sometimes that it might follow us, affect the children, Willow." Wade's voice was gentle but firm. "Your father's mistakes don't define you, and they certainly don't define our children. Will and Elizabeth will grow up knowing their own worth, not measured against anyone else's actions. You're right, of course." She smiled ruefully. "It's just hard sometimes carrying that shadow. We all have shadows, love, but we face them together." He kissed her softly. "Remember what I told you once. We make our own choices, forge our own paths." "I remember." The tension eased from her shoulders. "And we've forged a beautiful path, haven't we? The most beautiful." Wade's arm tightened around her. "And we're still just beginning." As the years passed, the Broken Z Ranch prospered, as did the Zachariah family. Will grew into a thoughtful young man with his father's strength and his mother's intelligence. Elizabeth developed into a spirited girl with a natural talent for horsemanship that made Wade beam with pride. When Elizabeth was 8, Willow gave birth to their third child, another son they named James Thomas Zachariah. Despite initial concerns due to Willow's age and her difficult second pregnancy, both mother and child emerged healthy and strong. The arrival of the railroad through Fort Garland transformed the once isolated community. The town grew larger, more prosperous, and Willow and Wade played significant roles in its development. Wade served on the town council, while Willow helped establish a proper school building with multiple classrooms and teachers. They faced challenges: 2 drought years that threatened the cattle, a scarlet fever outbreak that nearly claimed Elizabeth, economic downturns that required careful management of their resources. But through it all, their partnership remained strong, each challenge met together. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Wade surprised Willow with a journey back east, not to Boston, with its painful memories, but to New York and Philadelphia, where they attended the theater, visited museums, and showed their children a world vastly different from the Colorado ranch they called home. "Did you miss this?" Wade asked as they watched a sunset from their hotel balcony in New York. The conveniences, the culture. Willow considered the question thoughtfully. "Sometimes I miss certain aspects, but I've never regretted leaving it behind." She smiled at him. "Everything that truly matters is waiting for us back home." Home. The word held such richness now, such depth of meaning. Home was the ranch house with its library full of books and its walls covered with family portraits. Home was the garden where she still spent peaceful hours. Home was Wade's arms around her at night, their children's laughter during the day, the life they had built together. As they journeyed back to Colorado, Willow reflected on the words she had whispered to herself so long ago. "I'm nobody's woman." How wrong she had been. In becoming Wade's wife, she hadn't lost herself. She had found a fuller, richer version of who she was meant to be. And when they crested the final hill and saw the broken Z Ranch spread before them, the main house gleaming in the afternoon sun, she felt the familiar surge of joy that told her, beyond any doubt, that this was where she belonged. Wade reached across to take her hand, as if reading her thoughts. "Welcome home, Mrs. Zachariah." "It's good to be home," she replied, squeezing his fingers. "With you, with our family." That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, a tradition they had maintained through 2 decades of marriage, Wade put his arm around her shoulders. "20 years ago, you told me you were nobody's woman," he said softly. Willow looked up, surprised. "You remember that?" "I remember everything about our beginning." His eyes, still as green and compelling as they had been in youth, held hers. "I asked you to be mine, to be somebody's everything. And you've kept that promise." She leaned into his embrace. "You made me your everything, just as you became mine. No regrets." His voice held a hint of the vulnerability that he showed only to her. Not one. Willow turned to face him fully, cupping his weathered cheek in her hand. "Every choice, every moment has led us here. I wouldn't change a single day." As twilight deepened into night, they remained on the porch, talking quietly of the past they had shared and the future still unfolding before them. Their children would grow, the ranch would change hands someday, the world would continue its relentless progress. But the love they had forged in this wild, beautiful place would endure, a legacy as lasting as the mountains that stood sentinel over their home. And Willow Lawson Zachariah, once determined to belong to no one, found that in belonging to this man, this family, this life, she had discovered the truest freedom of all, the freedom to love and be loved completely, without reservation or fear. In the end, she had become not nobody's woman, but precisely the woman she was meant to be.